Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Clara Evans stepped out, clutching a stack of neatly organized folders against her chest. The 42nd floor of Hale Industries gleamed with polished marble and glass cold, quiet, perfect, just like its owner. At the far end of the corridor, behind the frosted glass office with gold lettering that read, Alexander Hale, CEO, a man's voice cut through the silence. "Miss Evans," he called, without even looking up from his screen. "Cancel my 5 p.m. with Lewis. Move the investors' dinner to tomorrow, and..." He paused, finally glancing up. "Get yourself a formal dress. You're coming with me tonight." Clara froze mid-step, unsure if she'd heard him right. "Sir?" she asked carefully. "The dinner?" Alexander said flatly, signing another document. "I need a companion who won't embarrass me. It's purely business." She blinked, heart pounding. In 3 years of working under him, he had never taken anyone to a company event, least of all her. "But Mr. Hale, I'm just your secretary. People might think..." "They'll think what I tell them to think," he interrupted, eyes back on the screen. "The car will pick you up at 7. That was the end of it. Clara returned to her small cubicle, her mind spinning. The other assistants exchanged glances and smirked. "A date with the boss?" one whispered. Guess plain Jane finally got noticed. She pretended not to hear, focusing on her typing, though her fingers trembled slightly. Alexander Hale was a man everyone admired from a distance. Rich, brilliant, and untouchable. He never smiled unless it was for the cameras. Rumor said he hadn't dated anyone seriously in years. For him to invite her, of all people, meant something strange was about to happen. That evening, as she entered her tiny apartment in Queens, the glow of the city lights spilled through the blinds. On the kitchen table sat a box wrapped in black tissue paper with a simple note in his sharp handwriting. Dress code, formal black. Inside was a gown that looked like it belonged to another world, silk, smooth and dark as midnight. She traced the fabric with trembling hands. She could never afford something like this in 3 paychecks. Why would he send it? For a brief second, her reflection in the window caught her attention, the tired eyes, the messy bun, the gray cardigan. Plain, as everyone said. She exhaled slowly. "It's just work, Clara," she whispered to herself. "Just work." But even as she said it, her heart didn't believe her. Somewhere downtown, in his penthouse overlooking Manhattan, Alexander stood by the window with a drink in hand, staring at the skyline. His assistant's name flickered in his mind longer than it should have. "It's just business," he muttered. Yet, for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he believed himself either. The next morning, Clara found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at the unfamiliar reflection. The black dress fit her perfectly, hugging her curves in all the right places, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel out of place in the luxurious clothes. The city skyline stretched before her, but her mind wasn't on the view. It was on the night ahead. Her heart raced as she thought about the dinner. A part of her couldn't believe that Alexander Hale, the man she had worked for all these years, had asked her of all people to accompany him. It didn't make sense. He had never shown any interest in her beyond professional boundaries. But last night, his words still echoed in her ears. "Get yourself a formal dress. You're coming with me tonight." It had felt like a command, but for some reason, she didn't want to resist. She stepped away from the mirror, grabbed her phone, and checked the time. It was almost 7. She was running late. She quickly gathered her things and rushed to the door, her heart still pounding in her chest. As she arrived at the lobby of her apartment building, a black car was waiting outside. The driver opened the door for her, and she slid into the back seat, the cool leather seats feeling strange beneath her. The driver didn't say a word, only starting the car and driving through the busy streets of Manhattan. Clara's mind raced with thoughts of the dinner, wondering what the night would hold. Was it really just a business event, like Alexander had said, or was there something more behind it? The car stopped in front of a towering hotel, its lights sparkling against the night sky. Clara felt a lump form in her throat as she stepped out of the car. The doorman held the door open for her, and she stepped inside, her heels clicking on the polished floor as she walked through the grand lobby. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, some curious, others judging. She was out of her element here, but she held her head high, reminding herself that this was just another task for Alexander, just another night of playing the part. She followed the staff member who led her to the private dining room. When the door opened, she saw Alexander standing by the large windows, his back to her. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, as always, and his presence seemed to fill the entire room. He turned as he heard the door close, and for a moment his eyes locked onto hers. Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. She had seen him countless times in the office, but this was different. Tonight, he looked at her like he saw her for the first time. His eyes softened, just slightly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "You look different," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. She hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice steady, but her heart pounding in her chest. Alexander nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "It's not what I expected," he admitted, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. Clara felt a flush rise in her cheeks. She had never been the type of woman to turn heads, but tonight, in this moment, something had changed. The atmosphere in the room was different, charged with an energy that neither of them had anticipated. The tension was palpable, but Clara tried to push it aside. "Shall we sit?" she asked, trying to sound composed. Alexander nodded, and they took their seats at the large, elegant table. The waiter brought over a bottle of wine, pouring them each a glass. "To business?" Alexander said, lifting his glass. Clara followed suit, her fingers trembling slightly as she clinked her glass against his. The dinner proceeded like any other, with polite conversation and the clink of silverware filling the air. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Clara could feel it, and she saw it in Alexander's eyes as he occasionally glanced at her. He had been a man of few words, cold and calculating, but tonight there was something different about him. The way he looked at her made her wonder if he was seeing her in a way he never had before. She couldn't help but feel the change in the air, but she pushed those thoughts aside. This was just a dinner, just business. As the evening wore on, they talked about the upcoming merger, the new projects Alexander was leading, and the future of Hale Industries. It was all routine. But every now and then, Clara caught herself thinking about the look in his eyes when he first saw her. And when he said, "You look different," she couldn't help but wonder if he meant more than just the dress. By the end of the night, Clara was exhausted, mentally and emotionally. As they stood up to leave, Alexander turned to her. "Thank you for joining me tonight," he said quietly. Clara nodded, her heart still racing. "It was my pleasure," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The car ride back to her apartment felt long and quiet, the weight of the night hanging heavy between them. But as she stepped out of the car and walked into her building, she couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner had marked the beginning of something that would change everything. The following days after the dinner felt like a blur for Clara. She returned to her usual routine at Hale Industries. But something had shifted. Alexander Hale had always been a man of few words, but after the dinner, there was a subtle change in the way he looked at her. It wasn't obvious, but it was there, a lingering glance, a slight smile when their eyes met across the office, something she hadn't seen from him before. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the tasks at hand, but it was hard to shake the memory of that evening. Every time he spoke to her now, there was a softness in his voice that hadn't been there before. It made her uneasy, yet it also made her feel seen in a way she never had before. One afternoon, as Clara sat at her desk going over some reports, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down, her heart skipping a beat when she saw it was from Alexander. "Meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes. Clara quickly gathered her things and made her way to the conference room, her thoughts racing. Was this a work-related meeting, or was it something else? She had no idea, but the thought of being alone with him again made her both nervous and excited. When she entered the room, Alexander was already standing by the window, looking out over the city. He didn't turn when she walked in, but she could feel his presence in the room. "Clara," he said after a moment, his voice as calm and controlled as always, "I wanted to talk to you about something important." She nodded, trying to steady her breath. "Of course, Mr. Hale. What's on your mind?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking a lot about the dinner," he began, his gaze intense. Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. She had been waiting for this conversation, though she wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't expect you to look at me like that," he continued, his words slow, deliberate. "Like what?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small room. "Like you were more than just a secretary," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "You're not just some assistant to me, Clara. I've realized that." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what he was saying, but she knew it was serious. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaky. Alexander looked at her for a long moment, his gaze softening. "I'm not good at expressing these things, Clara, but I want you to know that I see you differently now. I don't just see you as my employee anymore." Clara felt the weight of his words settle on her, her mind racing. Was he confessing something? Was he about to tell her he had feelings for her? She tried to hold it together, but the uncertainty was overwhelming. "Mr. Hale, she began, but he cut her off. "Please call me Alexander," he said gently, his voice low and sincere. "I've been a fool, Clara. I've always kept people at a distance, thinking that's how I needed to live my life. But after that night, I don't want to keep you at arm's length anymore." Clara was silent, the room suddenly feeling too small. She had never imagined this conversation would take this turn. She had always seen Alexander as the untouchable boss, the man who ran a multi-billion-dollar company with precision and cold detachment. To hear him speak like this, to see him vulnerable, was something she never expected. She took a deep breath, her mind spinning with questions. "What are you saying, Alexander?" she asked softly, her heart racing. He took another step closer to her, his expression intense. "I'm saying that I want to give us a chance," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I want to see where this goes, whatever this is. I don't know what it means yet, but I want to find out with you." Clara stood there, stunned by his words. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was this really happening? After all the years of being just his secretary, after all the years of looking at him from a distance, he was asking her for something more. "I don't know what to say," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything right now," he replied, his voice soft. "I just needed to tell you how I feel. I've been holding this in for too long." For a moment, there was silence between them, the tension in the air thick. Clara's mind was racing, trying to process everything he had said. She had never considered the possibility of anything romantic with Alexander, but now that the door was open, she couldn't deny the spark that had ignited between them. She took a step back, her thoughts still a whirlwind. I need some time to think," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm. Alexander nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course. Take all the time you need." With that, he turned and walked to the window, looking out over the city again. Clara stood in the middle of the room, her heart still pounding, unsure of what to make of the conversation they had just had. One thing was certain, though. Things were about to change. She didn't know how or when, but she could feel it in her bones. She turned and walked out of the conference room, her mind still reeling from everything she had just heard. The next few days passed in a blur for Clara, her mind constantly replaying the conversation she had with Alexander. Every time she saw him in the office, there was an underlying tension between them, something unspoken that hung in the air. She tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to his words, his confession. She had never imagined this scenario, never dreamed that the man who had been her boss for so long would feel anything more than professional regard for her. Yet here she was, trying to navigate a line between employee and something else entirely. It was Friday afternoon when she finally decided she needed to talk to him again, to understand what had changed between them, to figure out if there was even a chance of moving forward. Clara walked into his office with a steady breath, knocking lightly on the door. Alexander looked up from his desk, his sharp eyes meeting hers. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Come in. I was just about to call you." She stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her, and stood there for a moment, unsure of how to begin. He gestured for her to take a seat. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone genuine but distant. She took a seat, glancing down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her notepad. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quiet, "about what you said last time. About us." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest as he watched her carefully. "I know this is unexpected, Clara," he said, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. "But I can't ignore how I've been feeling, and I don't want to make this harder than it has to be." Clara nodded, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I don't know what to think," she admitted. "I've never been in a situation like this before. I've worked for you, respected you, and now everything feels different. She took a deep breath. And I don't know if I can just jump into something without understanding what it means. Alexander uncrossed his arms and leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. I get it, he said quietly. And I'm not asking you to jump into anything. All I'm asking is that you give me a chance to show you that I'm serious. That I want this, whatever it is between us. Clara swallowed hard, her heart racing as she processed his words. She had always admired Alexander from a distance, but the idea of being with him, of crossing that line, was something she hadn't considered until now. You have to understand, Alexander, she said, her voice trembling just a bit. I can't just turn off my feelings. I don't want to get hurt, and I don't want things to become complicated between us. He nodded, his expression softening. I don't want to hurt you, Clara. That's the last thing I would ever want. There was a long silence between them, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. Clara finally spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me? She asked. Do you want me to say yes? Do you want me to take this chance? Alexander took a moment to think, his gaze fixed on her. What I want is for you to make the decision when you're ready, he said, his voice steady and calm. I'm not asking you to rush. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm willing to wait, if that's what it takes. Clara felt a rush of emotions flood through her, the fear, the excitement, the uncertainty. She had never expected her life to take this turn, to be caught in the middle of something so unexpected and so powerful. But standing here, looking at Alexander, she couldn't ignore the connection that was growing between them, the magnetic pull that seemed to draw them closer. She stood up, her mind still swirling with conflicting thoughts. I need more time, she said, her voice firm. I need to figure this out. Alexander stood as well, walking around his desk to stand in front of her. He placed a hand gently on her arm. Take all the time you need, he said softly, his touch sending a shiver through her. But don't forget, Clara, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'm not giving up. Clara looked up at him, her heart beating faster than ever. She didn't know what the future held, or what this would become. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same again. As she walked out of his office, the weight of their conversation still heavy on her shoulders, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. She didn't know if she was ready to take that leap, but she knew she had to figure it out soon. Because whether she liked it or not, Alexander was right. Things were changing between them, and there was no going back. Days passed, and Clara found herself trapped in the whirlwind of her own thoughts. She couldn't shake the conversation with Alexander from her mind. Every interaction with him felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite define. He was patient, giving her the time she had asked for, but there was something in his eyes whenever they spoke, a vulnerability that she hadn't seen before. As the week went on, she found herself questioning her own feelings. Did she want to take that leap? Did she want to open herself up to someone like him? She had always been cautious with her heart, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of the complexities that came with relationships, especially one that could blur the lines of professionalism. But she couldn't ignore the way he looked at her, the way he had trusted her with his own emotions. He hadn't been like the other men she had encountered in the corporate world. He wasn't arrogant or detached. He was real, raw, and willing to be vulnerable. It was a quality she hadn't realized she admired until now. It was Friday afternoon when she saw him again. Alexander had sent a simple message earlier in the day. Meet me at the rooftop after work. I'll be waiting. Clara's stomach fluttered as she read the message. She hadn't expected to see him so soon after their last conversation, but something about the way he worded it made her feel like this was the moment she needed to make up her mind. The elevator ride up to the rooftop was slower than usual, each passing floor making her heart race faster. When the doors opened, she stepped out into the cool evening air, the city lights sparkling beneath her. And there, standing by the edge of the rooftop, was Alexander. He was dressed in a dark suit, his hair neatly styled, but there was an unspoken tension in the way he stood, waiting, expectantly. He turned when he heard her footsteps, his eyes locking onto hers. "Clara," he said, his voice calm yet full of meaning. "I'm glad you came." She smiled faintly, walking toward him. "I didn't know what to expect," she said, her voice soft. "But I'm here now." "That's all I needed," he replied, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been thinking about everything about us, and I want to make sure we're both on the same page before we go any further." Clara felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment. This was the conversation that would change everything. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves that bubbled inside her. Alexander took a deep breath, his expression serious. I've never been good at relationships, Clara. I've always kept people at arm's length, thinking that's what I needed to do to protect myself. But you've changed that. You've made me realize that I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to shut myself off from the possibility of something real. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. He was opening up to her, in a way he never had before, and it felt like a moment she would remember forever. What are you saying? She whispered, her eyes searching his. I'm saying that I want to be with you, Clara, he said, his voice soft but unwavering. Not just as your boss, not just as a colleague, but as someone who cares about you, who wants to see where this goes. I know it's complicated, but I'm willing to try if you are. Clara stood still, her mind racing as she processed his words. She had never expected him to be this honest, this open. It felt like a dream, but she couldn't deny the truth in his eyes. She had always admired him, but now, standing here in front of him, she realized she felt something more, something deeper than just admiration. I don't want to get hurt, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want things to get complicated between us, especially at work. I've worked so hard to get where I am, and I don't want to risk everything for something I'm not sure about. Alexander took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. I understand, Clara, he said softly. But I promise you, I'm not asking for anything complicated. I just want a chance to see where this can go. To give us both a chance to figure it out without any pressure, without any expectations. Just us. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Clara felt like time had stopped. She had never imagined that the man she had admired from a distance would be standing here, asking her for something real. She had always kept her emotions locked away, afraid of what might happen if she let them out. But now, she was at a crossroads. She could stay safe, keep everything the way it was, or she could take the leap, take the risk, and see what could be. I need to know that you're serious, Clara said, her voice firm but vulnerable. I need to know that you're not just doing this because it's convenient or because you're bored. Alexander reached out, gently cupping her face with his hand. I'm serious, Clara. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Clara looked into his eyes, her heart pounding. This was the moment where everything changed. She didn't know where this would lead, but in that moment, she made her choice. She took a deep breath and smiled softly. All right, Alexander, I'm willing to give this a chance. Alexander's face lit up with relief, and for the first time, Clara saw a genuine warmth in his eyes. It wasn't the cold, calculated look she was used to. It was something different, something real. He leaned in, his voice low and tender. Thank you, Clara, he whispered. You won't regret this. And as they stood there together, on the rooftop overlooking the city, Clara knew that her life was about to change in ways she could never have predicted. In the days following that night on the rooftop, everything between Clara and Alexander shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but there was a subtle change, an unspoken understanding that they were no longer just boss and employee. They were something more, something real. Clara had expected the transition to be awkward, but surprisingly, it was effortless. The boundaries they had once held so firmly professional, emotional, began to blur in the most natural way. They shared lunches together, and their conversations no longer revolved solely around work. Alexander was more relaxed with her, even laughing at her jokes, something Clara never thought she'd see. It was as though he was seeing her for the first time, not as an assistant, but as a woman, someone he genuinely admired. But, as much as things were changing, Clara still had her reservations. She wasn't ready to completely let her guard down. She knew the risks. A relationship like this, especially with someone as powerful as Alexander, could complicate everything. What if it didn't work out? What if they both ended up hurt? She couldn't afford to lose her job, not when she had worked so hard to get where she was. One afternoon, a week after their conversation on the rooftop, Clara walked into the office, her mind still caught up in her internal struggle. She had been avoiding Alexander for the past couple of days, not because she didn't want to see him, but because she needed space to think. As she walked toward her desk, she saw him standing in his office, watching her. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened when their gazes met. Without a word, he stepped out and walked over to her. Clara, he said softly, his voice low. We need to talk. Her heart skipped a beat. Is everything okay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that made her uneasy. "Can you come to my office?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. Clara followed him to his office, her heart racing. She had no idea what was coming, but she could feel the tension building. As they entered his office, Alexander closed the door behind them and gestured for Clara to take a seat. She sat down slowly, her mind racing with possibilities. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Alexander stood by the window, looking out over the city. For a moment, there was silence, the only sound the distant hum of the city below. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "About what we talked about where we're heading." Clara's stomach tightened. She didn't know what to expect. "And?" she asked, her voice soft. "I think it's time we make things official," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want everyone to know that you're not just my secretary anymore. I want them to know that we're together, that we're serious." Clara's heart raced. She hadn't expected him to say that. She hadn't expected him to want to go public with their relationship so soon. It was a huge step, and the thought of it made her feel both excited and terrified. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alexander stepped closer to her, his gaze intense. "I'm sure, Clara," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want you by my side, not just in the office, but everywhere. I want people to see you as my equal, as the person who means everything to me." Clara stood up, her legs feeling weak beneath her. She had never imagined a man like Alexander would feel this way about her. He was powerful, successful, and used to being in control. The fact that he wanted to go public with their relationship, to make it real, took her by surprise. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Alexander smiled softly, his eyes full of warmth. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said, his hand gently brushing her arm. "I just needed you to know how I feel. And when you're ready, we can make this official. I'll wait." Clara stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt so conflicted in her life. On one hand, she wanted nothing more than to say yes, to take that leap and be with him. But on the other hand, she was scared of the complications, scared of the unknown. She had worked so hard to build a career, to prove herself in a world dominated by powerful men, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to risk it all for something that could fall apart. "I need some time," she said finally, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I need to think about everything." Alexander nodded, his expression understanding. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. I just want you to know that I'm serious about this, and when you're ready, I'll be here." Clara walked out of his office, her mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. Things between them were about to get a lot more complicated, and she needed to be ready for whatever came next. The next few days were a whirlwind for Clara, as she tried to process everything that had happened. Alexander's words still echoed in her mind. His declaration that he wanted their relationship to be real, to go public, had caught her completely off guard. She had asked for time, but the pressure to make a decision weighed heavily on her. At work, things were different between them. The usual professional distance was gone, replaced by something more intimate, more vulnerable. Alexander had been patient, giving her space, but there were moments when their eyes would meet across the room, and Clara could feel the pull between them. It was undeniable. Despite the uncertainty, despite her fear of what might happen if they took that next step, Clara found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected. She spent her nights tossing and turning, her thoughts racing. Could she really go public with Alexander? Could she risk everything, her career, her reputation, for a chance at something real with him? She knew that a relationship with him would be complicated. They worked together, and their positions made things even trickier. She had worked so hard to prove herself in the corporate world, and the last thing she wanted was to be seen as someone who had gotten ahead because of a personal relationship. But at the same time, Clara couldn't deny the way Alexander made her feel like she was more than just an assistant, more than just a cog in the machine. He made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. It was a feeling that terrified her, but it was also one that she couldn't ignore. The following weekend, Clara decided to take a break from everything. She needed time to clear her head, to think things through without the constant pressure of work or Alexander's presence weighing on her. She packed a bag, grabbed her phone, and headed out to the nearby park for some fresh air. The weather was cool but pleasant, the crisp autumn leaves falling gently from the trees. She found a bench by the water and sat down, closing her eyes and letting the sounds of the park calm her racing thoughts. As she sat there, lost in her own thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching. She opened her eyes and saw Alexander standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. "Clara," he said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet air. "I didn't expect to find you here." Clara stood up slowly, her heart beating faster at the sight of him. "I needed some space," she explained, her voice steady despite the emotions bubbling inside her. "I've been thinking about everything." Alexander walked over and stood beside her, his presence familiar yet still holding a weight that Clara couldn't quite shake. "You're not the only one," he said quietly. "I've been thinking too, about us, about what this could be." He paused for a moment before continuing. "I know you're scared, Clara. I know you've got doubts, but I need you to know that I'm not asking you to take a leap of faith. I'm asking you to take a step with me, one step at a time." Clara felt her heart skip a beat at his words. She had been so afraid of taking that step, of opening herself up to the possibility of a relationship that could change everything. But Alexander's sincerity, the way he looked at her, the way he spoke it, made her want to believe that they could make it work. "But what if it doesn't work out?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we end up ruining everything?" Alexander shook his head, his expression soft but firm. "Then we'll figure it out. Together," he said. "I'm not asking for perfection, Clara. I'm asking for a chance to see where this could go. A chance to see if we can make this work, not just as colleagues, but as something more." Clara's mind raced as she processed his words. She had always been cautious, always held back, but now, standing here with him, she realized that she was ready to take that step. Maybe not all at once, but she was willing to give it a chance. "I'm scared," Clara admitted, her voice quiet. "But I'm willing to try." Alexander smiled, a warmth spreading across his face as he stepped closer to her. "That's all I'm asking for," he said gently. "We'll take it slow, Clara. One step at a time. No pressure, no rush, just us." For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a sense of peace wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, or where this journey would take them, but she knew that this was the beginning of something new, something real. They stood there for a few moments, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees the only noise around them. As Clara looked into Alexander's eyes, she knew that things were going to change. But this time, she was ready for it. Together they would face whatever came next. And for the first time, Clara felt like she wasn't alone. She had someone by her side, someone who cared, someone who was willing to take this journey with her. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Clara was willing to embrace it. The following weeks felt like a dream for Clara. She had taken the step, just as Alexander had promised, but every day still felt like a new chapter. They navigated their relationship with careful steps, slow but steady. Clara had agreed to take things one step at a time, and that's exactly what they did. They went on walks in the park after work, spent quiet evenings at Alexander's apartment, and shared lunch breaks away from the office. In those moments, it felt like nothing else mattered but the two of them. They both kept things low-key, not rushing into anything too quickly, but the connection between them grew stronger with every passing day. Clara couldn't deny that being with him, in this new dynamic, felt natural. She saw a side of Alexander she had never imagined. He was still the powerful, confident CEO in the boardroom. But with her, he was different, more relaxed, more open. There were moments when she saw vulnerability in his eyes, a depth that made her want to protect him. She had never expected to feel that way about her boss, but now it was hard to ignore. Yet, even as the relationship blossomed, Clara was still battling with her fears. The complications of being involved with someone at work, especially someone at Alexander's level, weighed on her. What if the office found out? What if people started whispering behind their backs? What if she was seen as just another one of Alexander's relationships? The idea of being judged made her uneasy. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that none of it mattered if she could be with him. And as time passed, it became clear to her that they could handle whatever came their way. They were stronger together. One night, as they sat on the balcony of Alexander's penthouse, watching the city lights below, Clara turned to him with a question that had been on her mind for a while. "What happens when people find out?" she asked softly, her voice uncertain. Alexander glanced at her, his gaze steady. "It's inevitable," he said quietly. The company will talk, but I don't care what they say. I'm not going to hide anymore. I'm done pretending. Clara felt a sense of relief wash over her. It had been one of her biggest worries: what would happen when the office found out about their relationship? Would they be treated differently? Would people assume she was only with him because of his power? But hearing him say that he didn't care, that he was willing to go public with it, made her heart swell with gratitude. It was a risk, but it was one she was willing to take. As they continued to spend time together, Clara began to feel more confident in their relationship. She saw the way Alexander interacted with her, how he made her feel valued not just as his assistant, but as an equal. He always made time for her, always made sure she felt heard, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt truly appreciated. And that wasn't something she could easily walk away from. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Alexander called her into his office. Clara walked in, her heart skipping a beat as she saw him standing by his desk, a serious look on his face. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but filled with purpose, "I want to talk to you about something important." She stood in front of him, waiting for him to continue. "I've been thinking," he said, his eyes locking onto hers, "about the future, about us. I know things have been moving quickly, and I want to make sure we're on the same page." Clara nodded, her heart racing. This conversation felt like a turning point. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander stepped closer to her, his hand gently brushing her arm. "I want to take this to the next level, Clara. I want to make you mine, completely. Not just in the office, but in every way." His words were simple, but they held so much meaning. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't expected him to say that, at least, not so soon. But the sincerity in his eyes told her that he wasn't joking. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, his voice firm with conviction. Clara looked into his eyes and saw the honesty there. He wasn't just saying this because it was the right thing to do. He was saying it because he truly wanted her. She took a deep breath, her mind spinning with the weight of his words. She knew this was a big decision, but she also knew she couldn't keep holding back. They had come this far, and she was ready to take that next step with him. "Okay," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I'm ready." Alexander's face broke into a smile, and for the first time, Clara saw the relief in his eyes. He stepped forward, taking her hand in his, and gently squeezed it. "You won't regret this," he whispered. And in that moment, Clara knew that everything was about to change again. But this time, she was ready for it. As they stood there, holding each other's gaze, Clara realized that love, real love, wasn't about perfection or waiting for the perfect moment. It was about taking risks, trusting each other, and knowing that together they could handle whatever came their way. The weeks that followed were both exhilarating and terrifying for Clara. She had taken the leap with Alexander, agreeing to make their relationship public. The decision hadn't come easily, but once she had said yes, something inside her clicked. She was ready for whatever came next. Alexander made sure that every step was taken slowly and with care. They continued to keep things relatively private at work, but the change in their dynamic was undeniable. He treated her with respect, with affection, and it was as though he was constantly showing her how much she meant to him. The office whispers that Clara had feared never came. It was almost as if the entire company respected their decision. No one made her feel uncomfortable, no one questioned her abilities or her worth. Instead, it seemed like people were more impressed by the way Alexander treated her. It was clear that he wasn't just the powerful CEO anymore. He was someone who valued her opinion, who cared for her, and who was willing to stand by her side no matter what. It was a feeling that made Clara's heart swell with pride and warmth. Yet even with everything seeming perfect, there was still one hurdle they had yet to overcome. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched by the world outside of their relationship. She had worked so hard to earn her place in this world, to be seen as someone who could succeed on her own merit. And now, there was always that lingering worry that people would question her success, that they would assume it was all because of Alexander. But every time she brought it up to him, he reassured her that he had never seen her as anything but capable, intelligent, and driven. It was this reassurance that kept her going, that kept her focused. It was a Saturday afternoon when Alexander took Clara to a small park near his apartment. The leaves were changing colors, and the air had a crispness to it that made Clara feel alive. They walked hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing all at once. It was peaceful, comfortable, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt truly at ease. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. About us, about everything we've been through. Clara looked up at him, her heart fluttering. She had grown to love the way he looked at her, as though she was the only person in the world. What about us? She asked softly. I want to take the next step, he said, his voice steady and sure. I know we've been taking things slow, but I think it's time. I want to marry you, Clara. I want to make this official, in every way. Clara stopped walking, her heart skipping a beat as she processed his words. You want to marry me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I've never been more certain about anything in my life, Alexander said, taking both of her hands in his. You're everything to me, Clara. I can't imagine my life without you in it. For a moment Clara stood there, completely still. She had never imagined this day would come. Had never thought that someone like Alexander Hale, someone so powerful, so confident, would ask her to be his forever. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw only sincerity, love, and a future she could finally picture. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, I'll marry you. The moment those words left her mouth, a wave of relief and joy washed over her. Alexander smiled, his eyes lighting up with happiness. He leaned down, brushing a kiss across her forehead. You won't regret this, he whispered, his voice full of promise. And just like that, everything fell into place. Their future, once uncertain, now seemed clear. Clara had always feared that she wasn't enough, that she didn't deserve someone like him. But in that moment, she knew that their love was more than just a passing phase. It was real, and it was theirs. In the months that followed, their relationship continued to flourish. Alexander took Clara on trips, showed her parts of the world she had never seen before, and made sure to include her in every aspect of his life. He was always by her side, supporting her and encouraging her to reach even higher. Clara felt more empowered than she ever had before, and she knew that with Alexander by her side, she could face anything. Their wedding day arrived like a dream. It was simple but elegant, just like their love. Clara wore a beautiful gown, and Alexander, standing at the altar with a look of pure adoration in his eyes, made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The vows they exchanged were personal and heartfelt, promises to love and support each other through all the challenges that life would throw their way. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, Clara realized that her life had truly changed. She had gone from a woman unsure of herself, unsure of her place in the world, to someone who was loved and cherished. She had found her partner, her equal. Alexander wasn't just the man she married. He was the person who had helped her discover her true worth. And as they left the church, surrounded by the people who cared for them, Clara knew that this was just the beginning of their beautiful journey together. She had found love, true love, and it was everything she had ever dreamed of.